The lobby of the building was a world of glass, marble, and quiet authority. Every sound that echoed there carried a weight, as if even whispers feared to stretch themselves too loudly in the shadow of power. The revolving doors spun ceaselessly as men in suits and women in heels moved briskly, each step echoing purpose. To work here meant to walk fast, talk less, and never make the mistake of meeting the wrong pair of eyes. Everyone knew the rules of the building, and everyone obeyed them. In the center of all that movement stood a little girl, barely 6 years old. Her dress was simple and faded, the kind of dress that belonged more to playgrounds than to this empire of polished glass. Yet there she was, standing still in a place where stillness was foreign. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair tied in a messy braid that had begun to unravel. She clutched the strap of her small, worn backpack with one hand, and with the other she nervously twisted a ribbon that had slipped loose from her hair. Her wide eyes followed the tall man who walked through the crowd like he owned the air everyone else breathed. The man was the CEO. Everyone in that building knew his name, though many dared not speak it aloud. He was power made flesh, a storm in a tailored suit. People whispered that his gaze could freeze a room, that his decisions could make or unmake lives before lunchtime. His presence demanded obedience and silence. Assistants nearly tripped over their own feet trying to keep pace with him. Folders clutched tightly to their chests. Employees stepped aside quickly as he walked, like waves parting before an unstoppable tide. Today, he looked even colder than usual. His jaw was tight, his steps sharp, and though his face revealed little, there was a heaviness about him that weighed on the very air. Some said he hadn't smiled in years, and not since the tragedy that had taken his family long ago. No one dared to remind him of it, but everyone knew. The man had built his empire brick by brick, not out of joy or ambition, but out of grief that had hardened into resolve. And yet, at that moment, just as he was about to step into the private elevator that only he was allowed to use, something unexpected happened. A tiny hand reached out and tugged at his. The CEO stopped. He never stopped. Time itself seemed to pause as he looked down. The assistants, the employees, the guards, they all froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. No one touched him, no one dared to. And yet here was a little girl, barely reaching his waist, holding onto his hand as if it belonged to her. Her voice was soft, trembling with innocence, but it cut through the silence like a bell in an empty cathedral. "Mama, I need a smile." The words were so simple, so pure, that for a moment, the man didn't know how to react. His entire life was made of transactions, contracts, negotiations, and battles. Everything had a price, everything but a reason. But these are this child asking for something so small, something he hadn't given in so long. It disarmed him. He stared at her, stunned, his hand still captured in her tiny grip. For the briefest moment, he thought of pulling away. That was what he always did. He kept people at a distance, never allowing anyone to cross the walls he had built around himself. But her touch was warm, achingly real. It reminded him of something buried so deep within that he had forgotten it existed. The feeling of being human, of being touched without expectation or fear. He followed the direction of her gaze, and his eyes landed on a young woman sitting quietly on a bench near the far wall. She seemed out of place in the grand lobby, dressed in clothes that had clearly seen better days. Her posture was weary, as though the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. She clutched the folder tightly against her chest, as if it contained her last hope. Her face was paled, her eyes downcast, her lips pressed into a thin line of exhaustion. The CEO's heart gave an unfamiliar ache, sharp and unbidden. He realized this was the girl's mother. The assistants exchanged nervous glances. Security guards shifted uneasily, unsure if they should intervene. Everyone was waiting for the explosion, for the icy words, the dismissal, the fury that usually followed anyone daring to disrupt his path. But nothing came. The CEO didn't pull away. Instead, he allowed the little girl's small fingers to keep holding his hand, as though it belonged to her. The child looked up at him again, her big eyes shimmering with sincerity. "Please," she whispered, "Mama, I need a smile." The words were more than just a request. They were a plea, not for herself but for the woman sitting alone, defeated by circumstances no one else seemed to see. The little girl didn't understand power or money or status. She understood only that her mother was hurting, and that maybe, Just maybe, a smile could heal something. The CEO swallowed. His throat suddenly tight. He hadn't smiled in years. He couldn't remember the last time his lips had curved without effort. Life had taken too much from him, and in return, he had taken everything from life except joy. Smiles belonged to a past he had buried. But now, in the face of the small, unshakable voice, he found himself walking, not toward his elevator, not toward the safety of his schedule, but toward the bench where the young woman sat. The little girl walked proudly beside him, still holding his hand as if guiding him. The employees stared in silence, unable to process what they were seeing. This Mona, this untouchable giant of the corporate world, was being led by a child, her steps small but determined. When they reached the bench, the woman looked up. Her eyes widened, and her breath caught in her throat. She had been waiting hours, hoping for a chance to deliver her folder to someone who might care, someone who might give her a chance. She had not expected him, the man at the very top, the man no one ever approached. She immediately stood, clutching the folder tightly, her lips parting to speak, to explain, to apologize for her daughter's boldness. But the CEO raised a hand slightly, silencing her without a word. His expression, though still composed, had softened in a way no one in the building had ever seen. "Your daughter," he said, his voice lower, gentler than anyone thought possible, "thinks you need a smile." The woman blinked rapidly, her throat working as she tried to respond. She looked down at her daughter, who was smiling up at her with hopeful eyes, and something inside her cracked. Slowly, tentatively, as if afraid it might shatter if she forced it, her lips curved into a smile. It was weak, yes, but it was real, fragile as glass yet glowing with the faint light of resilience. The CEO's chest tightened. He felt a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, spreading from where the child still held his hand. And before he realized it, his own lips curved. The smile was small, hesitant, but it was there. A real smile, not one forged for cameras or boardrooms. Gasps whispered through the lobby, so soft yet impossible to hide. They had seen eye to the impossible. Their CEO smiling, truly smiling, at a stranger. For him, it was not just a smile. It was a fracture in the wall he had built around his heart. A reminder that he was not as numb as he had forced himself to believe. That perhaps, buried beneath the weight of loss and loneliness, he was still capable of being moved by something pure. That single moment of the touch of a child's hand, the request for a smile, the quiet courage of a tired mother shifted something deep inside him. He didn't know yet what it meant, or how it would change him, but he knew, with certainty, that it had. And as he stood there, hands still in the girl's, he realized that this was not the end of his day as planned. This was the beginning of something else entirely.